He was known for his temper, his billions, and his silence. She was known for the way she made the floors shine. But when he caught her dancing with a mop in his spotless kitchen, laughing like freedom itself, everything he thought he knew about control began to fall apart. Dorothy Jones, a hardworking cleaning lady with dreams buried under years of quiet struggle, works in the immaculate glass mansion of James Guo. The most valuable commodity in James's billion-dollar mansion wasn't the art or the tech. It was silence. Yes, silence.
Before we begin, click subscribe to support our growth and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories, and you won't want to miss them.
Let's get into the story. The mansion had the expensive kind of quiet, polished, suffocating, and absolute. It swallowed laughter before it could breathe. Dorothy Jones wiped down a marble countertop with practiced hands, her mind drifting somewhere softer, somewhere that felt like home. 29, but carrying years that weren't hers to carry. The house belonged to James Guo, the youngest tech billionaire on the Carolina coast, brilliant, controlled, distant as winter. His fiancée, Catherine Matilda Swinton, lived here too, all elegance and ice wrapped in designer silk. Dorothy. Matilda's voice sliced through the stillness like breaking glass. Dorothy smoothed her apron and appeared in the dining room. Yes, ma'am. Matilda, draped in cream cashmere and cruelty, gestured at the already gleaming table with a diamond-ringed hand. Did I not say the table should shine? I'll redo it now, Dorothy said softly. You'll do it right the first time, Matilda corrected, her smile sharp enough to cut. Remember, Dorothy, presentation is everything, even for people who'll never be invited to sit at this table. The front door opened. James stepped in, tailored suit, cooler air, presence like a held breath. He scanned the room with unreadable eyes and passed through without a word. Matilda melted into honey. Darling, you're back early. A brief nod. Silence. Then he disappeared into his study, leaving cold in his wake. Dorothy picked up the silver cloth like it weighed more than it did, her face composed over a chest that ached. That night, on the narrow mattress in the servants' quarters, she slid a folded photograph from under her pillow, her mother smiling in front of a bakery sign that once read Jones' Delights. Dorothy whispered to the ceiling fan spinning slow circles above, just one more day. She didn't know tomorrow would rewrite the story of her life. The morning arrived with a kind of light that made even cold marble look hopeful. Dorothy woke to the sound of heels clicking against hardwood, sharp, impatient, expensive. Matilda was leaving. Dorothy dressed quickly, smoothing her uniform in the small mirror above the sink. Through the thin walls, she could hear Matilda's voice, crisp with instruction. James, darling, I'll be back by evening. The photographer wants natural light, so we're starting early. A pause. Try not to work yourself to death while I'm gone. His response was too low to hear, but Dorothy knew the tone, polite, distant, already half-focused on something else. The front door closed with finality. The house exhaled. Dorothy stepped into the hallway just as Mrs. Gale appeared, a clipboard in hand and warmth in her eyes. 60-something with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, Mrs. Gale had been with the Guo household for 3 years, long enough to know where kindness could live and where it couldn't. Morning, child, she said softly, handing Dorothy the day's checklist. Miss Matilda's in Charlotte till 6. Mr. Guo's in his study. You know the drill, quiet as church mice. Dorothy nodded, scanning the list. Kitchen deep clean. Guest bathroom. Dust the library. Standard Thursday. Mrs. Gale lingered, her voice dropping lower. You holding up all right? Yes, ma'am. You sure? I saw how she spoke to you yesterday. Dorothy offered a small smile. I'm used to it. Mrs. Gale's expression tightened with something like regret. That doesn't make it right. She patted Dorothy's shoulder. I'll be in the laundry room if you need me. Take your time today. The house breathes easier when she's gone. Dorothy watched her go, then turned toward the kitchen, checklist in hand. The kitchen was all glass and steel, sterile as an operating room. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the coast, casting long golden beams across the marble island. Dorothy tied her apron tighter and started with the counters, working methodically, letting the rhythm settle her mind. She wiped down the espresso machine, polished the sink until it gleamed, scrubbed the stovetop that never seemed to get dirty. It was the kind of work that made you invisible, necessary, but unnoticed. As she moved to clean, behind the refrigerator, her hand brushed against something wedged in the narrow gap between the appliance and the wall. A speaker. Small, black, covered in a thin layer of dust. Bluetooth, by the look of it. Probably left behind by one of the contractors who'd installed the kitchen upgrades last year. Dorothy pulled it out, curiosity flickering. She hadn't heard music, real music, not Matilda's curated classical playlists, in months. Her phone was old, cracked at the corners, but it still worked. She'd kept a few songs saved, the kind that reminded her of before. Before the bakery closed. Before her mother got sick. Before survival became the only language she knew. She glanced toward the hallway. The house was still. James was upstairs. Mrs. Gale was 2 floors away. Matilda wouldn't be back for hours. Just once, she thought. Just for a minute. She connected her phone to the speaker, fingers trembling slightly. The screen lit up, showing her playlist, only 6 songs, but each one a memory she couldn't afford to forget. She pressed play. The first notes of a Carolina jazz tune filled the kitchen, soft, warm, alive. A saxophone melody wrapped around a gentle rhythm, the kind of music her mother used to hum while kneading dough, the kind that made small rooms feel like home. Dorothy closed her eyes and let it settle over her. The mop leaned against the counter, forgotten. Her feet, bare against the cool marble, began to move, tentative at first, then bolder. She picked up the mop like a dance partner, one hand on the handle, the other extended as if someone were there to catch it. She spun slowly, the hem of her uniform swirling. The sunlight caught in her hair, turning it golden at the edges. Her smile broke free, unguarded, unafraid. For the first time in years, Dorothy wasn't cleaning. She was dancing. The music swelled. She moved with it, letting the melody guide her body, her laughter spilling out soft and breathless. The mansion, once suffocating, felt warm. The walls seemed farther away. The weight she carried, gone, just for these 3 minutes and 42 seconds. She twirled near the island, dipped low, came back up with her arms open wide like wings. What exactly do you think you're doing, Miss Jones? The world stopped. Dorothy froze mid-spin, her heart slamming against her ribs. The music played on, oblivious, mocking. She turned slowly, the mop still clutched in her hand. James Guo stood in the doorway. Tailored shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. Arms crossed. Expression unreadable, not angry, not amused, just watching. His eyes were sharp, the kind that calculated everything, missed nothing. Dorothy's breath caught. Her face burned. I'm sorry, sir. I was just cleaning. His gaze flicked to the mop in her hand, then to her bare feet, then back to her face. One eyebrow lifted, just barely. With your feet. Her throat tightened. Words tangled on her tongue. She fumbled for the phone, fingers shaking, but the song kept playing, filling the silence with proof of her rebellion. This was it. She was going to be fired, humiliated, sent back to an apartment she could barely afford, back to job applications that never called back to, finish your song. Dorothy blinked. I what? James didn't repeat himself. He simply stood there, waiting, his voice quiet but firm. Go on. Shock flooded her. Confusion. Fear. But underneath it all, something else. Permission. She glanced at the phone. The song had 20 seconds left. I don't understand. His tone softened just slightly. The song. Finish it. Dorothy's hands trembled. She looked at the mop, then at him, then at the sunlight pooling on the floor. Every instinct screamed at her to apologize again, to turn off the music, to disappear. But he'd said to finish. So she did. Slowly at first, hesitant, self-conscious. She moved her feet, guided the mop in a cautious circle. Her shoulders loosened. The melody wrapped around her again, coaxing her back into the rhythm. And then, as the saxophone soared, she let go. She spun, slower this time, but no less free. She didn't look at him. She couldn't. If she did, the spell would break. So she danced with her eyes half closed, letting the last notes carry her, letting herself be seen in a way she'd never been before. The song ended. Silence rushed back in, thick and heavy. Dorothy lowered the mop, chest rising and falling. She finally looked at him. James hadn't moved. His expression was still unreadable, but something had shifted in his eyes, something she couldn't name. He studied her for a long moment, as if trying to solve an equation that didn't fit his formulas. Then he spoke, his voice low and even. That'll be all, Miss Jones. He turned and walked away. Dorothy stood alone in the golden kitchen, sunlight still pouring through the windows, music still echoing in her bones. Her phone screen dimmed. The speaker went silent. She exhaled, slow and shaky, her legs suddenly weak. What just happened? Upstairs, James closed the door to his study and stood in the center of the room, staring at nothing. He'd come down for coffee. That was all. A simple task: walk to the kitchen, pour a cup, return to work. He had a prototype deadline, 3 investor calls, a board meeting at 2. But then he'd heard it. Music. Not Matilda's, Chopin. Not the bland acoustic loops that played during dinner parties. Real music. Warm. Human. And then he'd seen her. Dancing. Not performing, not aware of an audience. Just dancing, like it was the only language she knew. Her smile had been unguarded. Her movements unself-conscious. For a moment, she wasn't the cleaning lady who kept her eyes down and her voice soft. She was just alive. James ran a hand through his hair, jaw tight. He should have reprimanded her. Company policy was clear. Personal devices during work hours were prohibited. Distractions compromised efficiency. He'd fired people for less. But when he'd opened his mouth to say something sharp, something cold, the words had dissolved. Instead, he'd told her to finish. Why? He sat at his desk, pulled up the prototype interface, and stared at the screen. The algorithms blurred. All he could see was sunlight on dark skin, bare feet on marble, a mop held like a memory. James didn't do anything impulsive. He didn't do anything unexplainable. But something about that moment, her joy, so quiet and stolen, had cracked something open inside him that he didn't know how to close. He forced his focus back to the screen. Work, logic, control. But the echo of her laughter stayed, soft and stubborn, in the back of his mind. In the kitchen, Dorothy finally moved. She turned off the speaker, slipped her phone back into her pocket, and picked up the cleaning cloth with trembling hands. Mrs. Gale appeared in the doorway, eyes wide with concern. "Child, are you all right?" "I've heard music." "I'm fine," Dorothy whispered, though her voice wavered. "Did he?" "He told me to finish the song." Mrs. Gale went very still. "He what?" Dorothy met her gaze, still trying to process it herself. "He watched me dance." And then he just left. Mrs. Gale's expression shifted. Surprise, then something that looked like worry. She crossed the room and placed a gentle hand on Dorothy's arm. "Listen to me carefully," she said, her voice low. "Men like him don't see us, Dorothy. They look through us. And when they finally see you—" She paused, searching for words. "Just be careful, child. That kind of attention doesn't always end well." Dorothy nodded, but she wasn't sure she'd heard. Her mind was still spinning, still replaying the moment, the stillness in his eyes, the quiet command in his voice. "Finish your song." She turned back to the counter and resumed cleaning, hands steadier now. But everything felt different. The house, once suffocating, felt like it was holding its breath. And Dorothy, for the first time in years, wondered what might happen if she dared to exhale. James hadn't slept. At 3:47 a.m., he'd given up pretending and moved to his desk, pulling up lines of code that should have demanded his full attention. The AI prototype was due to investors in 6 days. 6 days to perfect an algorithm that could predict consumer behavior with 97% accuracy. 6 days to prove his company's valuation wasn't just hype wrapped in venture capital. But every time he focused on the screen, he saw her instead. Spinning, smiling, free. He dragged his hands down his face and reached for cold coffee, grimacing at the bitter taste. This was absurd. He'd seen an employee dancing. That was all. A momentary lapse in professionalism that he'd handled with unusual leniency. Nothing more. So why couldn't he stop replaying it? The way the sunlight had caught in her hair. The unguarded joy on her face. The fact that for those few minutes she hadn't been performing for anyone. Not him, not Matilda, not the world. She'd just been. James typed 3 lines of code, deleted 2, stared at the cursor blinking accusingly. Focus. At 6:15 a.m., he heard movement downstairs. Soft footsteps. The quiet clink of dishes. Dorothy, starting her day while the rest of the house still slept. He told himself not to go down there. He went anyway. The kitchen was softly lit, dawn breaking gentle through the windows. Dorothy stood at the sink, washing yesterday's wine glasses by hand. Matilda insisted the crystal was too delicate for the dishwasher. She hummed under her breath, something low and melodic, probably not even aware she was doing it. James stopped in the doorway, silent. She turned, sensing his presence, and the humming died. Her eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Guo, I'm sorry I didn't realize. Can I get you something? Coffee? Breakfast?" "No." His voice came out rougher than intended. He cleared his throat. "I'm fine." They stood in awkward silence, the space between them charged with yesterday's strange mercy. Dorothy turned back to the sink, hands moving faster now, shoulders tight with awareness. James should have left. Instead, he moved to the espresso machine and began the familiar ritual: grind, tamp, extract. The mechanical process usually centered him. Today, it just gave his hands something to do. "You're up early," he said, immediately regretting how obvious it sounded. "Yes, sir. I like to start before the house wakes up. It's quieter." Another silence, punctuated only by the hiss of the espresso machine. "About yesterday," she began. "It's fine," he cut her off too quickly. He pulled his cup from the machine. "You weren't bothering anyone." She nodded slowly, clearly uncertain how to navigate this conversation. He didn't blame her. He wasn't sure either. James took his coffee and left, feeling her eyes follow him out. Upstairs, in the cold light of his study, he finally admitted the truth he'd been avoiding all night. Something had shifted, and he had no algorithm to predict where it would lead. "Boss." James looked up from his screen, or more accurately, from the blinking cursor he'd been staring at for the past 20 minutes. Jason Park stood in the doorway, 26, and sharp enough to cut through James's usual deflections. "The prototype?" James asked. "Done. Sent you the latest build an hour ago." Jason stepped into the office, tablet in hand, but his eyes were studying James with uncomfortable perception. "You haven't opened it." James glanced at his inbox. "Unread. I'll review it this afternoon." "You always review immediately." Jason settled into the chair across from him, crossing his ankles with casual insolence. "You're staring into space, boss. Is that new software or new feelings?" "Get out." "That's not a denial." Jason grinned. "What's going on? You've been weird for 2 days. Is it Matilda? Did she finally say something so vapid your brain short-circuited?" James shot him a warning look. "Careful." "I'm always careful. It's why you pay me obscene amounts of money." He leaned forward, genuinely curious now. "Seriously though, what's up? You missed yesterday's investor call." "You missed a call." James set down his coffee with deliberate precision. "I rescheduled." "You never reschedule." There were distractions. Jason's eyebrows shot up. "Distractions?" James Guo doesn't get distracted. James Guo is a human productivity app. James Guo once coded for 46 hours straight and only stopped because I literally unplugged your. Jason. Fine. He stood, stretching. "But whatever this is, deal with it. We've got a pitch in 4 days, and I need you sharp, not." He gestured vaguely at James's face. "Whatever this is." After Jason left, James tried again to focus. He opened the prototype build, scanned through the updates, made notes that would have been thorough 3 days ago, but now felt perfunctory. His mind kept drifting. "You dance well." The words had formed before he'd thought them through. He'd been passing her in the hallway. She was carrying fresh linens, eyes down, almost invisible. And suddenly he'd needed her to know that he'd seen her, that she was good at something, at being alive. She'd frozen, clutching the linens like a shield, and he'd walked away before she could respond, before he could say something even more inexplicable. James rubbed his temples. This was getting out of hand. Friday afternoon, Dorothy was dusting the library when she heard the crash. She dropped her cloth and hurried toward the sound. James's study. The door was ajar. She knocked softly. "Mr. Guo." "It's fine." His voice was tight with frustration. She pushed the door open carefully. James sat at his desk, coffee spreading across the keyboard in a dark puddle. His jaw clenched with a kind of fury that came from small disasters during stressful days. "I've got it," he said, already reaching for tissues that would only make it worse. "Sir, you'll damage it." Dorothy moved forward instinctively, setting down her supplies. "Let me." He hesitated, then moved aside. Dorothy worked quickly, tilting the keyboard to drain the liquid, dabbing carefully between the keys, her movements practiced from years of cleaning up messes that weren't hers. James watched, arms crossed, as she saved his expensive equipment from his own carelessness. "You'll want to let it dry for a few hours," she said quietly, setting the keyboard upside down on a towel. "Rice in a bag works too, but this should be fine." "Thank you." The words came out stiff, unused to being necessary. Dorothy nodded and began gathering her supplies. As she reached for her cloth, their hands brushed, accidental, brief, electric. She pulled back. "So did he." "Miss Jones." She looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time since the kitchen. They were dark, unreadable, but something moved behind them, something almost vulnerable. "You helped me," he said simply. "Thank you." It was the first time she'd heard those words from him. The first time he'd acknowledged her as something other than furniture that occasionally needed direction. "You're welcome, sir." He held her gaze a moment longer, then nodded, dismissal. Dorothy left, her heart beating faster than dusting a library should warrant. Saturday morning, Dorothy was polishing the banister when James came down the stairs. She moved aside to let him pass, but he paused. "What were you listening to?" "In the kitchen." She blinked. "Sir." "The song." "When you were—" He gestured vaguely, unable or unwilling to say dancing. "What was it?" "Carolina jazz," she said carefully. "My mother used to play it when I was young." "Do you have a favorite artist?" This was surreal. Dorothy gripped the polishing cloth tighter. I like Charlie Poole and the North Carolina Ramblers. Old stuff mostly." James nodded slowly, as if filing this information somewhere important. "I don't know them." "Most people don't. Maybe that's a problem." Before she could respond, he continued down the stairs and out the door, leaving Dorothy standing on the landing, completely bewildered. Mrs. Gale found her 20 minutes later, still staring at the space where he'd been. "Child." Dorothy startled. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Gale's expression was heavy with concern. "I saw him talking to you. He just asked about music." "That's how it starts." Mrs. Gale set down her laundry basket and took Dorothy's hands, maternal and firm. "Listen to me. Men like him don't see us. They look through us. We're part of the wallpaper, the furniture. And when they finally do see you—" She paused, searching Dorothy's face. "It never ends the way you hope, honey. It ends with you hurt and him moved on to the next thing that caught his attention for 5 minutes. Dorothy wanted to argue, wanted to say this was different. But was it? "I'm just doing my job," she said instead. "I know you are. Just be careful. Whatever this is, this curiosity of his, it's dangerous. For you more than him." Dorothy nodded, but the warning slid off her like water. Because something had changed. Not just in James, but in her. For years, she'd made herself small, invisible, safe. It was survival. But that moment in the kitchen, when he told her to finish her song, something had cracked open inside her. Some old version of herself that remembered what it felt like to take up space, to be seen, to matter. She didn't know if Mrs. Gale was right about how this would end. But for the first time in a long time, Dorothy wasn't sure she cared. That night, James sat alone in his study, laptop open but ignored. On the screen, a search history he'd delete before morning. Charlie Poole discography. North Carolina Ramblers, complete recordings. Carolina Jazz history. He clicked on a playlist. Soft, old-fashioned music filled the room, the kind his world of minimalist electronica and ambient focus tracks had never made space for. It was warm, human, full of joy and sorrow tangled together. He closed his eyes and saw her again, spinning in the sunlight, free. Jason was right. He was distracted. But for the first time in years, James wasn't sure he wanted to fix it. Matilda returned on a Tuesday afternoon with the force of a cold front. Dorothy heard her before she saw her, the sharp click of heels against marble, the imperious tone already issuing commands to the driver about luggage placement. The house, which had been breathing easier for 5 days, suddenly tensed like a body bracing for impact. Dorothy was in the music room, carefully dusting the grand piano that no one ever played, when she heard Matilda's voice echo through the halls. "What is that smell?" Mrs. Gale's response was too quiet to hear, but Matilda's wasn't. "Lavender? Since when do we burn candles in the middle of the day? This isn't a spa, it's a private residence." Dorothy's hands stilled on the piano keys. She'd lit the candles, small votives Mrs. Gale kept in the kitchen, the kind that made the house feel less like a museum. It had seemed harmless, a small warmth. Now it felt like evidence. She heard Matilda moving through the rooms, her displeasure growing with each discovery. the soft jazz playing from the kitchen speaker. The windows opened to let in coastal air. The vase of wildflowers Dorothy had picked from the garden and placed on the entryway table. Small acts of life in a house built for display. Who allowed this? Matilda's voice carried from the foyer, sharp as breaking ice. Dorothy set down her cloth and walked toward the sound, her heart steady with resignation. Mrs. Gale stood near the staircase, hands folded, face carefully neutral. Matilda stood in the center of the foyer, surveying the space like a general returned to find her territory occupied by insurgents. Her eyes landed on Dorothy. Something flickered there, recognition, suspicion, triumph. Miss Jones. Matilda's smile was the dangerous kind. How lovely. Perhaps you can explain why my home smells like a boutique hotel and sounds like a jazz club. Dorothy kept her voice even. It was my fault, ma'am. I thought. You thought. Matilda moved closer, her perfume, something expensive and cold, preceding her. That's your first mistake, Dorothy. You're not paid to think. You're paid to clean. Yes, ma'am. And yet here we are, with candles and music and flowers. She picked up the vase from the entry table, examining it like a foreign object. Wild daisies. How rustic. She set the vase down with deliberate care, her gaze never leaving Dorothy's face. Let me be very clear. This is not your home. These are not your choices to make. You exist here to maintain a standard, not to redecorate according to your pedestrian tastes. I understand, ma'am. It won't happen again. Oh, I know it won't. Matilda's voice dropped to something softer, more lethal. Because if it does, you won't be here to make the mistake a third time. Mrs. Gale shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Dorothy nodded once, swallowing the knot in her throat. Remove the candles, close the windows, and turn off whatever that noise is. Matilda waved dismissively toward the kitchen. I want this house returned to proper order by dinner. Yes, ma'am. As Dorothy turned to go, Matilda's voice followed her like a blade. Oh, and Dorothy? Don't mistake his politeness for interest. Men like James don't see people like you. They simply tolerate your presence. Dorothy didn't respond. She walked to the kitchen, mechanically turning off the speaker, blowing out candles, closing windows until the house felt suffocated again. An hour later, Matilda found James in the library. He sat in the leather chair by the window, laptop balanced on his knee, but his attention was elsewhere. Through the doorway, visible in the adjacent music room, Dorothy was dusting, the same task she'd been doing when Matilda interrupted her. She moved with quiet efficiency, her expression carefully blank. But James was watching her. Not obviously, not inappropriately, just watching. The way someone might watch a painting they were trying to understand. Matilda's jaw tightened. James. He looked up, his expression settling into its usual controlled neutrality. You're back. Clearly. She moved into the room, closing the door behind her with a soft click. We need to talk. About whatever's happening in this house. She crossed her arms, her posture elegant even in confrontation. I leave for 5 days and return to find it's been transformed into some kind of bohemian retreat. Candles, music, the staff practically humming while they work. James returned his attention to his laptop. Sounds pleasant. It's inappropriate. Matilda's voice sharpened. This is our home, James, not a bed and breakfast. Standards matter. Boundaries matter. I'm aware. Are you? She moved closer, her eyes glittering with something cold and knowing. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've forgotten what those boundaries are. James's fingers stilled on the keyboard. Meaning I've seen the way you look at her. The room went very quiet. James closed his laptop with deliberate calm and met Matilda's gaze. I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't insult my intelligence. Matilda's voice was ice-wrapped in silk. The cleaning lady, James. Really? Her name is Dorothy. I don't care what her name is. Matilda leaned against the desk, her posture deceptively casual. I care that you've apparently lost your mind in my absence. I haven't lost anything. Then what do you call this? She gestured vaguely toward the music room, where Dorothy continued working, unaware, or pretending to be. You're watching the help like she's a painting in a gallery. It's beneath you. James stood, his voice dropping to something dangerously quiet. What's beneath me is this conversation. No, what's beneath you is whatever fantasy you've constructed about that girl. Matilda's composure cracked slightly, revealing the fury underneath. She's the help, James. She cleans toilets and polishes silver. She is not, and will never be, part of your world. Maybe I'm tired of my world. The words hung in the air like a lit match. Matilda stared at him, something like genuine shock breaking through her practiced poise. You've gone mad. No. James's voice was steady, almost gentle. I'm listening. To what? Peace. Matilda laughed, but there was no humor in it. Peace? Is that what you call this? James, she's the help. She's paid to be invisible, to be obedient. Don't confuse that obedience with emotion. She'd smile at a wall if you paid her enough. You don't know her. I don't need to know her. Matilda straightened, her armor back in place. I know her type. Grateful, humble, sweet. It's a performance, darling. A survival strategy. And you're fool enough to think it's real. James took a step forward, his voice dropping lower. Maybe emotion is what this place needs. This place needs order, control, standards. Matilda's eyes flashed. Not some cleaning lady's attempts at domesticity. She's trying to make herself indispensable, James. Can't you see that? The music, the candles, it's all calculated. Or maybe it's just human. Human. Matilda repeated the word like it tasted bitter. How poetic. And when you're done playing humanitarian, what then? You'll marry her? Introduce her to your board? Bring her to galas where she won't know which fork to use. That's enough. It's not nearly enough. Matilda moved toward the door, her hand on the knob. But I'll make this simple for you. Her or me, James. Choose. She swept out before he could respond, leaving the door open behind her. In the music room, Dorothy's hands trembled against the piano keys. She'd heard everything. Every cruel word. Every casual dismissal of her worth. The way Matilda had reduced her to a performance, a strategy, a type. But worse, she'd heard the silence after Matilda's ultimatum. The absence of James's voice defending her, choosing her, proving Matilda wrong. Because Matilda wasn't wrong, was she? Dorothy was the help. She did clean toilets and polish silver. She was paid to be invisible. And for 5 days, she'd let herself forget that. Let herself believe that music in the kitchen and questions about jazz and quiet thank yous meant something more than they did. Mrs. Gale's warning echoed. Men like him don't see us. They look through us. A tear slipped down Dorothy's cheek. She wiped it away quickly, picked up her cloth, and continued dusting. The piano gleamed under her touch, perfect and silent, and as cold as the house had always been. The sky had been threatening all day, heavy clouds rolling in from the Atlantic, turning the afternoon light strange and green. By evening, the first drops began to fall, fat and deliberate against the mansion's glass walls. Dorothy was finishing the guest rooms when the thunder started, distant but determined. She moved through the hallways with practiced efficiency, checking windows, securing shutters. Matilda had left that morning for a charity event in Raleigh, her departure marked by icy silence and a pointed look at Dorothy that said their conversation wasn't finished. James hadn't left his study all day. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof like fingers on a table. Dorothy was closing the last window in the conservatory when the lights flickered once, twice, and died. The mansion plunged into darkness, so complete it felt solid. Dorothy froze, her hands still on the window latch, waiting for the backup generator to kick in. It didn't. "Miss Jones." Mrs. Gale's voice called from somewhere below. "You all right up there?" "I'm fine," Dorothy called back. "Just finishing the windows." "Hurry down when you're done. This storm's not playing." As if to prove the point, lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the conservatory in stark white relief. Thunder followed immediately, close, angry. Dorothy secured the last latch and felt her way toward the hallway, one hand trailing along the wall. She knew this house in the dark now, had memorized its rhythms and corners. But tonight it felt different, alive somehow, breathing with the storm. She was passing the study when she saw the flicker of candlelight beneath the door. She should have kept walking. Should have gone downstairs where Mrs. Gale was probably lighting candles in the kitchen, where safety lived in company and common sense. Instead, she knocked softly. Yes. Dorothy opened the door. James sat at his desk, surrounded by candles that cast shadows dancing up the walls. His laptop was closed, useless without power. He'd loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves, small concessions to the storm that made him look unexpectedly human. "I was just checking the windows, sir. Making sure everything's secure." "Come in." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Unless you need to be somewhere else." Dorothy hesitated. This was dangerous territory. Alone with him, darkness outside. Matilda's ultimatum still echoing in her mind. But the storm was raging, and something in his voice sounded less like an employer and more like someone who didn't want to be alone. She stepped inside, leaving the door open, a small act of propriety in an improper situation. "The generator's out?" she asked. "Circuit breaker, I think. Jason will fix it in the morning." James leaned back in his chair, studying her in the candlelight. "You're not afraid of storms." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "No, sir. I grew up with them. Carolina summers." He nodded slowly. Thunder rumbled, closer now. Rain lashed the windows with increasing fury. "You ever wish you could start over?" The question came quietly, almost lost beneath the storm's noise. Dorothy looked at him, startled by the vulnerability in it. "Sir, start over. Different choices. Different life." He picked up a pen, turning it between his fingers, a nervous gesture she'd never seen from him before. "If you could go back, would you?" She thought about her mother's bakery, about dance classes in a church basement, about the scholarship letter that had arrived 3 days after the eviction notice, about every fork in the road that had led her here, polishing silver in a house that hated warmth. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Some days, yes. But then I think about who I'd have to stop being to get there, and I'm not sure it's worth it." James looked up, something like recognition in his eyes. "That's the problem, isn't it? We become who we are through all the things we survive. Take those away, and we're just hypothetical. Is that what you feel like? Hypothetical?" The question was too bold, too personal. But the storm gave her courage, and the darkness made honesty easier. "Sometimes." He set down the pen. "My father built this company from nothing. Died at his desk trying to keep it alive. I was 23, barely out of Stanford, and suddenly I was responsible for 300 employees and a legacy I didn't ask for." Lightning illuminated his face, the exhaustion there, the weight. "I thought if I just worked hard enough, was smart enough, controlled enough variables, I could make it all make sense. build something that mattered. He laughed quietly, bitterly. Instead, I built this. Glass walls and algorithms. A house that can't breathe, and a fiancé who treats people like furniture. She loves you, Dorothy said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. She loves what I represent. There's a difference. More thunder. The candles flickered, but held. What about you? James asked. What did you want to be? Before all this. Dorothy smiled sadly. A dancer. Seriously? Seriously. I had a scholarship to Duke. Full ride. Contemporary dance program. The memory tasted like copper, beautiful and painful. My mother got sick the summer before I was supposed to start. Lung cancer. She didn't have insurance, and the bills. She trailed off. I stayed home, took care of her, worked at a diner. When she died, the scholarship was long gone. I'm sorry. Me too. Dorothy looked at her hands, calloused now, nothing like a dancer should be. But I got to be with her in the end. Got to hold her hand while she slipped away. Some people don't get that. Silence settled between them, punctuated by rain. You make this house feel human again. James's voice was barely above a whisper. Dorothy's breath caught. Sir. James. When it's just us, just James. I shouldn't. I know. Neither should I. He looked at her with something that might have been anguish, or hope, or both tangled together. But you do. Make it human. Make me remember what that feels like. Lightning cracked, so close the thunder was instantaneous, shaking the windows. Dorothy flinched, hard, her body remembering some childhood fear. Without thinking, James reached across the desk and steadied her hand. His palm was warm against her knuckles. Not grasping, not pulling, just there. Steady. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The storm raged outside, but inside the study, candlelight flickering across their joined hands, the world narrowed to breath and pulse and dangerous possibility. Then Dorothy pulled away, gentle but firm. I should go. Mrs. Gale will worry. Of course. James withdrew his hand, something like regret crossing his face. Thank you. For talking. You're welcome. James. His name felt strange in her mouth, intimate, forbidden. She stood quickly, smoothing her uniform with trembling hands. At the door, she paused. For what it's worth, I don't think you're hypothetical. I think you're just buried under expectations that aren't yours. She left before he could respond, before the candles could betray how much her hands were shaking. Downstairs, Mrs. Gale had transformed the kitchen into a warm haven, candles on every surface, the gas stove heating water for tea, the storm held at bay by routine and light. She looked up when Dorothy entered, her eyes too knowing. Everything secure? Yes, ma'am. You were up there a while. Dorothy busied herself with the tea kettle, just checking all the windows, making sure nothing was leaking. Mrs. Gale was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful, concerned. Child, come sit with me. Dorothy obeyed, settling into the chair across from the older woman. Mrs. Gale poured tea, chamomile, the kind meant for calming nerves, and slid a cup across the table. I know what it's like, she said softly, to be seen by someone who's supposed to look through you. It feels like magic, doesn't it? Like suddenly you matter. Dorothy wrapped her hands around the warm cup, but said nothing. I had a situation once. Different house, different city. 20 years ago now. Mrs. Gale's eyes grew distant. The man I worked for, he was kind. Asked about my day. Remembered my birthday. Small things that shouldn't have meant anything, but did. She sipped her tea, the memory clearly painful. His wife found out. Not that anything had happened, nothing did. But she saw the way he looked at me, and that was enough. I was fired without references. Couldn't find decent work for 2 years. Mrs. Gale. I'm not saying Mr. Guo is that man. I'm saying the line between kindness and danger is thinner than you think. She reached across and covered Dorothy's hand with her own. Men like him, honey, they can afford to be curious, to experiment with humanity when they're bored or lonely. But when it gets complicated, they go back to their world, and we're left in ours. Except now our world is smaller because we lost our job over a conversation that meant everything to us and nothing to them. Dorothy felt tears prick her eyes. It's the first time anyone's really seen me. In years. Since my mother died. I know, baby. I know. Mrs. Gale's voice cracked with sympathy. And that's what makes it so dangerous. Because you're not falling for him. You're falling for the feeling of being visible. And that's not the same thing as love. It's just need. On both sides. Lightning flashed outside, farther away now. The storm was moving on. What should I do? Dorothy whispered. Protect yourself. Keep your distance. Do your job and nothing more. Mrs. Gale squeezed her hand. And if you can't do that, if this is already too deep, start looking for another position. Before it ends badly. Dorothy nodded, but even as she did, she knew she wouldn't follow that advice. Couldn't. Because something had shifted in that study, in the candlelight and vulnerability. Something that felt like recognition. Two people buried under different kinds of expectations, reaching toward each other across the dark. It was dangerous. It was foolish. But it was also the first thing that had felt real in longer than she could remember. Upstairs, James sat alone in the dying candlelight, his hand still warm from where he'd touched hers. He'd crossed a line tonight, spoken truths he'd never said aloud, revealed weaknesses he'd spent years burying under competence and control. And she'd understood. Not pitted, not judged, just understood. Matilda's ultimatum echoed, her or me. As if it were that simple. As if choosing between comfort and truth was a decision made in logic rather than in moments like this. Storms and secrets, and the terrifying recognition of being seen. The power flickered back on, harsh fluorescent reality flooding the study. James blew out the candles one by one, watching the smoke curl toward the ceiling. Tomorrow he would be rational again, would rebuild the distance, would remember all the reasons this was impossible. But tonight, in the space between thunder and breath, he let himself imagine a different life. One where glass walls could shatter, where humanity wasn't a weakness, where a woman who danced with mops could matter more than empires. The storm moved east, leaving silence in its wake. And James sat in that silence, knowing it would never feel innocent again. The bracelet had arrived 3 days after the storm. Dorothy found it on her narrow bed in the servants' quarters, a small velvet box, no note. Inside, delicate silver, simple enough not to be ostentatious, but beautiful in its craftsmanship. She turned it over in her hands, searching for meaning, and found it engraved on the inside. Keep dancing. Her breath had caught. She should have returned it immediately. Should have left it on his desk with a polite refusal. But instead, she'd slipped it onto her wrist, where it caught the light when she moved, a secret warmth against her skin. She wore it under her sleeve, a private thing, a promise she didn't fully understand, but couldn't let go. Matilda found it on a Thursday. Dorothy had been cleaning the guest suites when she heard the commotion, Matilda's voice sharp with triumph, calling for James. She'd frozen, cloth in hand, instinct warning her that something had shifted, something irreversible. By the time she reached the top of the stairs, Matilda was already in the foyer, the velvet box open in her palm, like evidence at a trial. James stood near his study door, his expression carefully neutral, but Dorothy could see the tension in his shoulders. Well, Matilda's voice was ice and fire combined. Care to explain why I found this in the maid's quarters? Mrs. Gale appeared from the kitchen, her face pale. She caught Dorothy's eye and shook her head slightly. Stay quiet, stay invisible. But it was too late for invisible. It's a bracelet, Matilda. James's voice was measured, controlled. Not a state secret. It's engraved. She read the words with venomous precision. Keep dancing. How touching. How absolutely inappropriate. She turned to Dorothy, who stood frozen on the stairs. Come down here. Dorothy descended slowly, each step feeling like walking toward execution. She kept her eyes lowered, hands clasped in front of her, the posture of someone who knew her place. Show me your wrist, Matilda commanded. Dorothy hesitated, then pushed up her sleeve. The bracelet gleamed under the chandelier light, delicate and damning. Matilda's laugh was cruel. Of course you're wearing it. Like some lovesick teenager with a charm from her boyfriend. She turned back to James, her voice rising. Did you give this to her? The house held its breath. Yes, James said simply. The word landed like a grenade. Matilda's composure shattered. Are you insane? You gave jewelry, engraved jewelry, to the help? To her? She gestured at Dorothy as if she were something distasteful. What's next, James? A car? A credit card? Maybe a room upstairs where she doesn't have to pretend she belongs below. Matilda. Don't. Her voice cracked like a whip. Don't you dare try to rationalize this. I've watched you for weeks. The lingering, the questions, the pathetic way you watch her dust like it's performance art. I thought you were just bored. I didn't realize you'd actually lost your mind. She advanced on Dorothy, her heels clicking like gunshots against marble. Dorothy forced herself to stand still, to not flinch, even as Matilda's fury radiated like heat. You think a bracelet and a smile make you someone? Matilda's voice dropped to something soft and poisonous. You think because he noticed you for 5 minutes, you've transcended what you are? You'll always be the maid, Dorothy. Always. No matter what pretty trinkets he gives you, no matter how many songs you dance to, you'll always be the woman who cleans his toilets while I sit at his table. Dorothy felt the words like blows, each one designed to cut, to remind her of every insecurity she'd ever carried. But underneath the pain, something else stirred. Something that had been building since that afternoon in the kitchen, since the storm, since every small moment of being seen. Dignity. I never tried to be anything else, she said quietly. The room went still. Matilda stared at her, momentarily thrown by the response. What? I never tried to be anything else, Dorothy repeated, louder now, meeting Matilda's gaze directly for the first time. I know what I am. I know where I stand. I didn't ask for the bracelet. Didn't ask for attention. I just exist here. And I'm sorry if that somehow threatens you. Matilda's face flushed crimson. Threatens me? You arrogant little. That's enough. James's voice cut through the room like steel. He moved forward, positioning himself between Matilda and Dorothy. This ends now. Oh, it ends now. Matilda's fury redirected toward him. You're right about that. It ends with her gone. Fired. Out of this house tonight. No. The word hung in the air, final and uncompromising. Matilda's eyes widened with genuine shock. No. She's done nothing wrong. I gave her a gift. That's not a crime. It's a boundary violation, James. It's inappropriate and unprofessional. And if you can't see that, then you're more far gone than I thought. She stepped closer to him, her voice dropping to something almost pleading. I'm trying to save you from yourself, from making a mistake that will ruin everything you've built. Maybe what I've built needs ruining. Matilda recoiled as if struck. For a long moment, she just stared at him, something like heartbreak flickering across her face before hardening into rage. Fine. She pulled the engagement ring from her finger, 3 carats, flawless, cold, and threw it at his feet. Choose the maid. See how long that fantasy lasts when your board finds out, when investors pull funding, when every business magazine runs the story of how James Guo threw away his empire for the woman who scrubbed his floors. She grabbed her purse from a hall table, pulled out her phone with shaking hands. Matilda, don't, James started. But she was already dialing, her voice shifting into something smooth and calculated. Hello, Carolina Society? This is Catherine Swinton. I have a story you're going to want to hear about James Guo and his rather unconventional household staff. Mrs. Gale gasped. Dorothy felt the blood drain from her face. James moved toward Matilda, but she backed away, phone pressed to her ear, smile vicious. That's right. Photos would be lovely. I'll text you the address. I'm sure you'll want to be here when she's packing her things. She ended the call and looked at James with cold triumph. You want to choose her? Fine. But you'll do it in front of the entire world. Let's see how noble you feel when your face is on every gossip site tomorrow morning. Matilda swept toward the door, pausing only to look back at Dorothy one last time. Enjoy your 15 minutes, sweetheart. I promise they'll be the most expensive of your life. The door slammed behind her with brutal finality. The silence that followed was suffocating. Mrs. Gale moved first, touching Dorothy's arm gently. Child, you should pack. If the press is coming. No. James's voice was rough. Nobody's packing. Nobody's leaving. Dorothy finally looked at him, really looked at him. He stood in the middle of his foyer, engagement ring at his feet, his carefully controlled world crumbling around him. And somehow, impossibly, he looked more alive than she'd ever seen him. Sir James, this is... She struggled for words. This is going to destroy you. Your company, your reputation, everything. Let it. You don't mean that. He crossed her, stopping at a distance that was still proper but felt intimate. I'm tired, Dorothy. Tired of living in a house that can't breathe. Tired of pretending that control and silence are the same as peace. Tired of... He paused, something raw in his expression. Tired of not dancing. Tears burned behind Dorothy's eyes. The press will be here soon. They'll twist this into something ugly. They probably will. Your investors will survive. James. Her voice broke. I'm not worth this. I'm not worth your whole life falling apart. He reached out slowly, carefully, and took her hand, the one wearing his bracelet. Maybe you're exactly what's worth it. Mrs. Gale cleared her throat diplomatically. Mr. Guo, I mean no disrespect, but the girl's right. This is going to be a scandal. If the press gets photos, if they run the story Matilda's selling. She shook her head. There's no coming back from that kind of attention. Then we don't come back. We go forward. To what? Dorothy pulled her hand away gently. James, be realistic. What happens tomorrow? Next week? You can't build a relationship on rebellion. And I can't, her voice caught. I can't be the reason you lose everything. Maybe I should go, she whispered. Pack tonight. Leave before they arrive. Make this easier for everyone. James was quiet for a long moment. Then, maybe I should ask you to stay. The words hung between them, weighted with impossible possibility. That's not fair, Dorothy said softly. I know. You're asking me to stand beside you while your world burns down. Yes. Why? He looked at her with something that might have been desperation, or hope, or both tangled together. Because you're the first real thing I've felt in years. Because when I'm around you, I remember what it's like to be human instead of just functional. Because... He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated by his inability to articulate something that defied his usual logic. Because when I imagine tomorrow without you in it, all I see is more glass walls and expensive silence. Dorothy's tears finally spilled over. This is crazy. Probably. We barely know each other. I know. He smiled sadly. But I know you dance with mops. I know you hum when you think no one's listening. I know you gave up your dreams to hold your mother's hand while she died. I know you make this house feel like it has a heartbeat. He paused. And I know that's more than I've known about anyone in a very long time. Outside, car doors slammed. Voices carried through the evening air, reporters, arriving faster than anyone expected. Mrs. Gale looked toward the door, then back at them. Whatever you're going to decide it now. In about 3 minutes, this becomes very public. Dorothy looked at James, really looked at him. At the man who'd told her to finish her song, who'd given her a bracelet that said keep dancing, who was willing to let his empire crack for the possibility of something real. And she thought about what Mrs. Gale had warned. The line between kindness and danger is thinner than you think. She was standing on that line now. One step forward into chaos and scandal and possibility. One step back into safety and invisibility and small, quiet rooms. The doorbell rang, aggressive, insistent. Dorothy took a breath and made her choice. The Guo Technologies annual gala was always held the third Saturday in November, a display of wealth, innovation, and carefully curated influence. This year, it had become something else entirely, a spectacle. The scandal had been building for 3 days. Since Matilda's call to Carolina society, the story had metastasized across social media, gossip sites, and eventually mainstream business publications. Headlines ranged from salacious to sympathetic, but all of them reduced Dorothy to an archetype, the help who seduced the billionaire. Tech Titan's downfall, a modern fairy tale gone wrong. James was cleaning lady controversy. James's PR team had begged him to cancel the gala. His board had strongly suggested he make a statement distancing himself from the situation. Jason had offered to handle everything while James disappeared to the Cayman house until things calmed down. James had refused all of it. We're going, he'd said simply. Both of us. Now, standing in her small room with Mrs. Gale fussing over her hair, Dorothy wondered if courage and stupidity were really that different. You don't have to do this, child, Mrs. Gale said softly, pinning a final curl in place. You could still slip out the back. I'd drive you myself. Get you somewhere safe until this blows over. Dorothy looked at her reflection in the small mirror. The dress was simple, black, elegant, bought from a boutique that James had somehow convinced to open after hours. It fit her perfectly, made her look like she belonged in rooms where champagne cost more than her monthly salary used to. But she still felt like Dorothy Jones from a dead-end town with a mother buried in a grave she couldn't afford to mark properly. I told him I'd be there, she said quietly. That man is asking you to walk into a lion's den. I know. Dorothy turned to face Mrs. Gale, managing a small smile. But he's walking in with me. That has to count for something. Mrs. Gale's eyes filled with tears. She pulled Dorothy into a tight embrace. You're braver than I ever was. Braver than you should have to be. The Greystone Hotel ballroom glittered with calculated opulence. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, 500 of the most powerful people in North Carolina's tech and business sectors. Dorothy entered through a side door, as arranged, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could feel the stares immediately, the whispers that stopped just short of her hearing, the phones subtly angled to capture photos. She kept her head high, remembering what James had told her. You don't owe them shame. You didn't do anything wrong. But Lord, it felt like she had. Jason appeared at her elbow, surprisingly gentle. Come on. I'll get you situated before the circus really starts. He guided her toward the back of the ballroom, away from the main clusters of guests. For what it's worth, I think the boss is doing the right thing, even if it tanks the company. That's supposed to be comforting. He grinned. I'm an engineer, not a therapist. I do my best. He deposited her near a column where she could see, but remained somewhat separate from the crowd. Dorothy accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter more for something to hold than any desire to drink it. Then Matilda arrived. She swept through the entrance like a queen returning to reclaim her throne. Designer gown in ice blue, diamonds at her throat and wrists, her smile sharp enough to cut. She hadn't been invited, but Matilda had never needed invitations. She simply took space and dared anyone to challenge her right to it. The room's energy shifted. Whispers intensified. Cameras that had been discreet became obvious. This was what everyone had been waiting for. The confrontation, the drama, the spectacle of powerful people destroying each other in public. Matilda's gaze swept the ballroom and landed on Dorothy with laser precision. Her smile widened. Dorothy forced herself to meet those eyes, to not shrink, to not run. Whatever happened next, she would face it standing upright. The lights dimmed. A voice over the speaker system announced that Mr. Guo would be addressing the guests momentarily. James took the stage. He looked exactly like what he was, powerful, composed, a man who'd built empires from algorithms. His suit was impeccable, his posture confident. But Dorothy could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the podium just a fraction too tight. Their eyes met across the ballroom. He nodded almost imperceptibly. "Trust me," the gesture said. "Good evening." His voice carried easily through the space. "Thank you all for being here tonight. This gala has always been about celebrating innovation, about recognizing the people who push boundaries and challenge assumptions." Standard opening. The crowd settled, expecting the usual speech about quarterly projections and technological breakthroughs. James paused, his gaze traveling across the faces, staring up at him. "But this year, I want to talk about something else. About what happens when we get so caught up in building the future that we forget to live in the present." Murmurs rippled through the room. This wasn't the script. I've spent the last decade creating systems, perfecting algorithms, trying to predict human behavior through data. And I got good at it. Good enough to build a company worth billions. Good enough to convince myself that control and success were the same thing. He gripped the podium tighter. "But they're not. And it took someone unexpected to show me that." Dorothy's heart stopped. "We celebrate innovators and disruptors. We build statues to people who change the world. But we ignore the ones who keep the world running while we're busy changing it." His voice strengthened. "The ones who clean, who build, who care. The ones who show up every day to do work we consider beneath notice, but couldn't function without." Matilda's face had gone pale, then red. She set her champagne glass down with a sharp click. "Especially," James continued, his eyes finding Dorothy's across the distance, "one person who reminded me that life isn't code. It's not data points or profit margins or carefully controlled variables. It's music. It's movement. It's being brave enough to dance even when you think no one's watching." He gestured toward the back of the room, toward Dorothy standing frozen by the column. "This is Dorothy Jones." Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. Hundreds of faces turned. Cameras swiveled. The room held its breath. Dorothy felt like she might shatter. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to become invisible again. But James was looking at her with something like awe, like pride, like she was the bravest thing he'd ever seen. So she stayed. "Dorothy cleans my house," James said simply. She polishes silver and dusts furniture and does 100 small tasks that keep my life running. Tasks I never thought about, never appreciated, never saw until I saw her. His voice softened. She taught me what humanity feels like again. What it means to be real instead of just functional. What it costs to survive with grace and dignity when the world keeps trying to make you invisible. Matilda stood abruptly, her chair scraping against marble. "This is pathetic," she announced to no one and everyone. "You're throwing away everything for a cleaning lady? For her?" The room went deathly quiet. James didn't flinch. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm finally holding on to what matters. She's nothing." Matilda's voice cracked with fury and something that might have been pain. "She's a nobody who got lucky because you were bored and lonely and stupid enough to confuse gratitude with love." Dorothy felt the words like physical blows, but before she could respond, before she could shrink back into invisibility, something unexpected happened. A woman in the front row stood up, mid-50s, elegant, familiar. Dorothy recognized her as Elena Rodriguez, CEO of a major healthcare company. "I started as a janitor," Elena said clearly. 17 years old, cleaning offices at night while I took classes during the day. Nobody saw me either. She looked directly at Matilda, until someone did, and that changed everything. Another person stood, then another. A venture capitalist who'd been a dishwasher, a tech founder who'd worked construction, an investor whose mother had cleaned houses to put him through college. Stories, dignities, witnesses to the invisible becoming visible. Matilda's champagne glass fell from her hand, shattering against the marble floor in a spray of crystal and wine. The sound echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. She stared at James, at Dorothy, at the room full of people refusing to be complicit in her cruelty. Then she turned and walked out, her heels clicking a staccato retreat, cameras flashing in her wake. James stepped down from the stage. The crowd parted as he walked toward Dorothy, his eyes never leaving hers. When he reached her, he held out his hand. "Dance with me." Dorothy looked at that offered hand, at everything it represented. Risk, scandal, the terrifying possibility of being seen, of mattering. Around them, the ballroom held its breath. She took his hand. The music started, soft jazz, Carolina rhythm, the kind her mother used to hum. James pulled her gently onto the floor, and they moved together, imperfect and human and wholly, defiantly real. And as cameras flashed and whispers swirled, Dorothy Jones danced in a ballroom full of powerful people and felt, for the first time in her life, like she belonged exactly where she was. The mansion was dark when they returned, except for the soft glow Mrs. Gale had left in the kitchen, a silent welcome that said, "I'm glad you're home safe." Dorothy kicked off the heels in the foyer, her feet aching, but her heart still racing from the gala. The dance, the cameras, the moment when James had chosen her in front of everyone who mattered in his world. "I should," she started, unsure how to finish. "Go to her room? Make tea? Pretend this was normal?" "Stay," James said quietly. "Just stay for a minute." They moved to the living room, both too wired for sleep. James loosened his tie, and Dorothy curled into the corner of the sofa, the black dress pooling around her like ink. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, they could see the ocean, dark, restless, reflecting the moon in fractured silver. "That was insane," Dorothy finally said. "It was necessary." "James, she struggled for words. "You exposed everything. Your private life, your relationship with Matilda, me. By tomorrow morning, every news outlet in the country will be running the story." "Let them." "You say that now, but when your board calls, when investors pull out, when—" The front door burst open. Matilda stood in the entrance, still in her ice blue gown, mascara smudged, fury radiating from every angle of her body. She must have driven straight from a gala, must have been building this rage during the entire journey. "How dare you," she seethed, advancing into the room. "How dare you humiliate me like that in front of everyone?" James stood slowly, positioning himself between Matilda and Dorothy. "You should go home, Matilda. This is my home. Or it was, until you lost your mind over the help." She pointed at Dorothy without looking at her, as if eye contact would be too much acknowledgement. "You threw your career away for her, your reputation, your future, everything we built together." "We didn't build anything together." James's voice was calm, final. "You curated. You decorated. You turned my life into a showroom, and then complained when I stopped feeling at home in it." Matilda flinched as if struck. "I loved you. You loved what I represented. The power, the wealth, the status. You loved being Catherine Swinton, fiancée of James Guo." He shook his head. "But you never knew me. Never asked what I wanted, what I feared, what kept me awake at night. To you, I was just another acquisition." "And she knows you?" Matilda's laugh was sharp, brittle. "A woman who's been in your life for what, 6 months? Who cleans your toilets and dusts your shelves? You think that's intimacy?" "She sees me," James said simply. "That's more than you ever did." The words hung in the air, devastating in their simplicity. Matilda's composure cracked completely. Tears spilled over, ruining what was left of her makeup. "I gave you everything. 5 years, James. 5 years of standing beside you, supporting your company, being exactly what you needed. Being what you thought I needed," he corrected gently. "And I'm sorry, Matilda. I'm sorry I let you build a life around a version of me that was already dying. I'm sorry I didn't end this sooner, before it hurt this much. But I'm not sorry for finding something real." Matilda looked between him and Dorothy, her expression cycling through rage, grief, and finally, something like understanding. Or maybe just exhaustion. "You're making a mistake," she said, but the venom had drained from her voice. "She'll never fit in your world. The press will destroy her. Your board will force you out. And when it all falls apart, and it will, you'll realize what you gave up." "No," James replied. "I finally built something worth keeping." Matilda stared at him for a long moment. Then she walked to the hallway, retrieved a designer bag Dorothy hadn't noticed her drop, and headed for the door. She paused at the threshold, looking back one last time. "I hope she's worth it," she said quietly. "She is." The door closed behind her with a soft click, so much quieter than Dorothy expected for the end of an engagement, the collapse of a future, the crumbling of an empire built on appearances. James stood very still, staring at the closed door. "Are you okay?" Dorothy asked softly. "I don't know yet." He turned to face her. "Ask me tomorrow." Dorothy couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., she gave up trying and slipped out of her room, moving through the quiet house on bare feet. She found herself drawn to the windows, to the view of the ocean that had mesmerized her since her first day here. The porch door was open. James stood outside, leaning against the railing, rain misting the air in soft whispers. He'd changed into jeans and a simple shirt, the most casual she'd ever seen him. Dorothy wrapped her cardigan tighter and stepped out. "Can't sleep either?" He glanced over, unsurprised by her presence. Too much adrenaline. Too many thoughts. She joined him at the railing, both of them looking out at the dark water. The rain was gentle, more atmosphere than weather, cool against her skin. "You shouldn't have done that," she said softly. "At the gala. You didn't have to expose everything, sacrifice everything." "I wanted to, James. I wanted them to see what I see." His voice was firm, certain. "Needed them, too." Dorothy turned to look at him. And what do you see? He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Someone who survived losing everything and still finds reasons to dance. Someone who makes beauty out of ordinary moments. Someone who, he paused, struggling. Someone who made me remember who I am, who I want to be. You barely know me, Dorothy whispered. I know enough. I know you hum when you think no one's listening. I know you send half your paycheck to a church fund for families who can't afford funerals. I know you keep your mother's recipes folded in your Bible. I know you're terrified of thunder, but you stood outside in a storm to make sure the windows were closed. He turned to face her fully. I know that in 6 months, you've taught me more about being human than I learned in 34 years. Tears pricked Dorothy's eyes. What if Mrs. Gale is right? What if this is just curiosity? What if in a month, you wake up and realize you gave up everything for someone who doesn't fit in your world? Then we'll build a different world. It's not that simple. Maybe it is. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, silver. Another bracelet, identical to the one on her wrist. He turned it over, showing her the engraving. Keep dancing. A matching set? Dorothy asked, confused. A promise. James slipped it onto his own wrist, incongruous against his expensive watch, his tailored life. That this house will never be silent again. That we won't hide who we are or what we feel. That joy matters more than perfection. He looked at her with raw vulnerability. That you're not alone in this, whatever this becomes. Dorothy stared at the bracelet on his wrist, at the way the silver caught the porch light, at the physical manifestation of a man choosing connection over control. People are going to judge us, she said. They're going to say terrible things. Probably. Your company might suffer. Your reputation will survive. Or it won't. Either way, I'll still have this. He gestured between them. Whatever this is. You don't even know what this is, Dorothy said, but she was smiling through tears now. No. He smiled back. But I know what it feels like. And that's more than I've had in a very long time. The rain fell softer now, almost stopping. Through the mist, the first hint of dawn touched the horizon. Not light yet, but the promise of it. Dorothy looked at James, really looked at him. At the man who'd caught her dancing and instead of punishing her joy, had asked her to finish her song. Who'd given her a bracelet that said keep dancing when the world kept trying to make her sit still and small. Who'd stood in front of 500 powerful people and said this woman matters. I'm scared, she admitted. Me too. What if we're making a mistake? Then we'll make it together. He held out his hand, not demanding, just offering. Dance with me. Dorothy laughed despite herself. There's no music. There's always music. You taught me that. She took his hand. They moved together on the wet porch, no rhythm but their own, no audience but the ocean and the breaking dawn. Imperfect, uncertain, wholly alive. Inside, Mrs. Gale watched from the kitchen window, a cup of chamomile tea cooling in her hands. She shook her head, worry and hope warring in her expression. Lord, let this be different, she whispered to the empty kitchen. Let these two find what the rest of us only dream about. The rain stopped. The sun began its slow climb above the horizon. And in a mansion that had known only expensive silence, music finally came home to stay. James pulled back slightly, just enough to see Dorothy's face in the growing light. I don't know what happens next, but I know I want to find out. Dorothy touched the bracelet on her wrist, then the matching one on his. Same promise. Same promise. No more silence. No more hiding. No more silence, she echoed. They stood together as morning broke, a tech billionaire and a cleaning lady. Two people who'd found humanity in the space between control and chaos. The world would have opinions. The press would have headlines. The future would have complications. But right now, on a rain-washed porch with matching silver promises on their wrists, they had something far more valuable. They had each other. And that, Dorothy thought as James pulled her close again, was worth every risk they'd taken to get here. 6 weeks later, the mansion breathed differently. It started with small things, windows left open to catch the salt air, music drifting from unexpected rooms, the scent of Mrs. Gale's cinnamon rolls on Sunday mornings. The crystal vases that had stood empty for years now held wildflowers from the garden. Candles burned on ordinary Tuesdays. Laughter no longer sounded like trespassing. The press had been vicious at first, exactly as predicted. Headlines dissected every angle. Billionaire's downfall, from penthouse to poorhouse. The maid who broke an empire. 3 board members had resigned. 2 major investors had pulled funding. The company's stock had dropped 18% in a single week. James had weathered it with surprising calm. He'd hired a new PR team, restructured the board, and given a series of interviews where he spoke honestly about burnout, about losing himself in the pursuit of perfection, about finding humanity in unexpected places. Some people respected it. Others called it a midlife crisis wrapped in social justice language. He didn't seem to care either way. The stock will recover or it won't, he'd told Jason over coffee one morning. Either way, I can finally sleep at night. Jason had just grinned. Boss, I never thought I'd say this, but you're actually becoming likable. It's unsettling. Dorothy still worked at the mansion, though now the arrangement was different. She tried to quit 3 times in those first chaotic weeks, insisting that her presence made everything harder. Each time, James had refused to accept her resignation. You're not leaving because of gossip, he'd said firmly. If you want to leave because you want something different, that's your choice. But don't leave because strangers with opinions think you should. So she'd stayed, though now she worked fewer hours, took classes 2 evenings a week at the community college, James's suggestion, her choice of subjects, and lived in the guest house rather than the servants' quarters, a change that had sparked another round of media speculation, but felt right to both of them. Mrs. Gale had adapted with surprising grace. If you're going to rewrite all the rules anyway, she'd said, might as well do it thoroughly. The house had become something neither sterile showroom nor servant's domain, just a home where people lived, worked, and sometimes danced in the kitchen when the mood struck. It was a Thursday evening in early December when Dorothy finished organizing the library, a task she'd volunteered for because she'd always loved the room's quiet warmth. She'd alphabetized the fiction section, dusted the reading lamps, and opened the curtains to let in the last golden light of sunset. As she stepped into the hallway, she heard it. Soft music drifting from the living room. Not her jazz this time. Something slower, more classical, a piano piece she didn't recognize but found beautiful. Dorothy followed the sound and stopped in the doorway. James stood in the center of the room, his back to her, one hand extended as if holding an invisible partner. He took a hesitant step, then another, clearly counting beats in his head. His movements were stiff, uncertain, nothing like the controlled precision he brought to everything else. "What are you doing?" Dorothy asked, amused. James turned quickly, caught. For a moment he looked almost embarrassed, an expression she'd never seen on him before and found endearing. "Research," he said. "Research. I've been watching videos. Tutorials." He gestured vaguely at his laptop open on the sofa, paused on a ballroom dancing lesson. "Apparently there are steps. Patterns. I thought if I memorized them." Dorothy laughed, the sound bright in the quiet room. "You're trying to learn to dance from an algorithm? It's a systematic approach." "It's very you," she interrupted, moving into the room. "But dancing isn't code, James. You can't debug it into perfection." He looked at her with that particular expression he got when confronted with something his logic couldn't solve. Then how do you learn? By doing. By feeling. She held out her hand. By letting someone teach you. James stared at her offered hand for a moment, then took it. His palm was warm, his grip uncertain in a way that made him seem more human than any business meeting ever had. Teach me, he said quietly. Teach you what? How to dance. Dorothy smiled. You don't dance. Then I'll learn. She positioned them properly. One hand in his, the other on his shoulder, his free hand settling carefully at her waist. The touch was respectful but intimate, familiar now after weeks of navigating what they were to each other. Forget the steps, Dorothy said softly. Just listen to the music. Feel where it wants you to go. That's not very specific instruction. It's not supposed to be. Dance isn't about perfection, it's about connection. She squeezed his hand gently. Now follow me. She moved, and he followed, awkwardly at first, stepping on her foot once, apologizing immediately. But gradually, something shifted. His shoulders relaxed. His counting stopped. He began to feel the rhythm instead of fighting it. They moved through the living room in a slow circle, the sunset painting everything gold. His movements were still imperfect, his timing occasionally off, but there was something beautiful in the trying, in watching a man who'd spent his life controlling variables learn to surrender to music. Dorothy's laughter came freely now, not mocking but joyful, encouraging. The silver bracelet on her wrist caught the light with each movement, matched by the one on his. You're doing it, she said. I'm stepping on you less frequently, he corrected. That's not the same as doing it well. It's the same as doing it real. That's better. They continued moving as the song shifted to something even slower. James pulled her slightly closer, his confidence growing. You changed the rhythm of my life, he said softly, his voice almost lost beneath the music. Dorothy looked up at him, at the man who'd caught her dancing and chosen to join her rather than shut her down. You changed mine. For better or worse. Definitely for different. She smiled. But yes, for better. Even with the media circus, the scandal, the death threats from my more unhinged fans. Even with all that. She rested her head briefly against his shoulder. Because before this, I was surviving. Now I'm living. That's worth some bad headlines. They swayed together as the light faded from gold to purple to the soft blue of evening. Through the windows, the ocean reflected the first stars. I'm not very good at this, James admitted. At dancing, at any of it, relationships, spontaneity, being human instead of functional. He paused. But I'm trying. That's all anyone can do. Dorothy pulled back slightly to meet his eyes. And for what it's worth, you're getting better every day. The music ended, but they didn't stop moving, creating their own rhythm in the silence, a private dance that needed no audience, no perfection, no validation beyond the two of them choosing this moment. From the kitchen doorway, Mrs. Gale watched with misty eyes. Jason, who'd stopped by to drop off reports and stayed for the show, stood beside her. Think they'll make it, he whispered. I don't know, Mrs. Gale replied, but I think they'll try. And sometimes that's enough. Later that night, after James had returned to his work and the house had settled into comfortable quiet, Dorothy stood alone in the living room where they danced. She touched the bracelet on her wrist, keep dancing, and thought about everything that had changed since that afternoon in the kitchen when she'd been caught mid-spin with a mop for a partner. The mansion hummed now with something it had never held before, warmth. Not the expensive kind that came from designer candles and curated playlists, but the real kind, born from laughter and music and two people brave enough to be imperfect together. She thought about her mother, about the bakery that had failed, about the scholarship she'd lost, and the dreams she'd buried. And for the first time, she felt something other than grief when she remembered. She felt gratitude. Because all those losses, all that survival, all those years of being invisible, they'd led her here. To a house that finally felt like home. To a man who saw her. To a life that was messy and complicated and more real than anything she'd imagined. Dorothy turned off the lights and headed toward the guest house, humming softly, one of her mother's old songs, the kind that made small rooms feel infinite. Behind her, the mansion settled into its new rhythm. No longer silent, no longer suffocating, no longer a glass prison masquerading as perfection. Just a house where people lived and loved and sometimes danced in living rooms when the music moved them. And in the morning, James would wake early and make coffee. Dorothy would arrive and tease him about his terrible timing. Mrs. Gale would hum hymns while polishing vases. Jason would crack inappropriate jokes about workplace romance. Life would continue, imperfect, uncertain, gloriously human. But tonight, in the quiet after the dance, both James and Dorothy lay in separate beds, thinking the same thing. This is what home feels like. He caught her dancing and thought he was angry. But what shocked him most wasn't her joy. It was that, for the first time in years, he felt it too. And in learning to dance with her, imperfectly, awkwardly, with no regard for the steps he was supposed to follow, James Guo discovered something no algorithm could have predicted. That sometimes the most extraordinary hearts awaken not through grand gestures or perfect moments, but through the simple courage to keep dancing, even when the world says you should stand still. Dorothy had taught him that, and he would spend the rest of his life learning the lesson. Thank you for watching. Every story holds a truth waiting to be seen or told. If this one moved you, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more untold stories that touch the heart and change perspectives. We share stories that remind us of strength, love, and second chances. Subscribe now and be part of a community that believes every story deserves to be heard. Thank you.